I'm Dane Rose, and in this video we'll explore the links, the correlations between unlovability, the belief that we are unlovable, and PTSD. So the first link is quite obvious. If we have PTSD, we are not optimally loved by anyone in our life. So how do we get to that? Well, having PTSD is among the most painful and disabling patterns of disease, psychological, physiological, that a person can have. And so optimal love means healing the disease of PTSD. And the fact that anyone has PTSD in the world today means that no one, including the person who has PTSD, has the ability and willingness to love themselves optimally, right? Because to optimally love oneself includes avoiding PTSD and then healing it once it arrives. And I have PTSD, and I have not been able to heal that PTSD, right? So what I'm saying is I don't know how to love myself enough to cure one of the most painful phenomena in my life and one of the more painful things that a human can experience, chronic PTSD. So, but it's not personal, meaning I don't know how to cure it. My parents don't know how to cure it. My grandparents don't know how to cure it. No one in my family knows how to cure PTSD, which means that no one in my family knows how to love me optimally, including me, right? Now, the Second World War gave PTSD to my grandfather, who came back with PTSD. Now, he gave PTSD to my father, and my father and my mother gave it to me, right? So no one in my grandfather's generation knew how to prevent war. They didn't, right? Or the war wouldn't have happened, right? If you know how to prevent war, and you're competent enough to understand the fact that the Second World War was not good for anyone. It wasn't good for the Germans. It wasn't good for the English. The British lost an empire. They descended from the status of empire to an island. Now, you could say the Americans won if winning is losing many of your young men and spending years in a war machine rather than educating and growing the economy in a more constructive way. The point is nobody loses, nobody wins with a war. The winners don't win. If you think that you can win a war, it just means you're incompetent. And if you know that avoiding war is superior in intelligence to having a war. Now, sometimes, of course, you've got to have everyone with that level of intelligence, right? But if you're facing an adversary that is profoundly stupid, it also means that you don't have the competence to educate a profoundly stupid adversary into being an informed ally. So what we're really saying here is stupidity is all around us. Incompetence is all around us. And that's the reality of a world where people cause PTSD but don't know how to heal it. People cause wars but don't know how to prevent them. And it becomes an intergenerational abuse cycle, right? So grandfather got PTSD, beat the shit out of my dad, shamed my dad. Dad got PTSD. Dad decided to have children too because it's only raising an innocent child, right? How hard could it be, right? And gave that PTSD, that terror, to me. And I don't know how to get rid of it either. So that's not love. That's PTSD, right? They're not the same word. Love, PTSD, massive, chronic, unnecessary suffering, healing, well-being, joy, safety. They're very different. My father gave me more PTSD than he gave me love, right? So what does that mean? It means that no one in the entire cult in which my father was raised knew how to heal his PTSD. If a single person in the entirety of my father's life, he died with PTSD. So did my grandfather. If a single person in the entirety of my father's life knew how to cure PTSD and had done so, my father wouldn't have died with PTSD. He wouldn't have died in terror. He wouldn't have died in loneliness. He wouldn't have died feeling out of control and helpless the way he died. And if he hadn't felt those feelings and the physical symptoms, he wouldn't have given those physical symptoms to his children, right? That's not love. That's PTSD. So the link between unlovability and PTSD begins with the fact that for there to be PTSD anywhere on the planet, because it is a virus, right? Anyone with PTSD will give it to some degree or another to the people closest to them, and certainly the people in dependent, fragile relationships, such as children, infants, right? Anyone who has PTSD will give it to the people closest to them. Anyone with a cold will give a cold to the people closest to them. Anyone with extreme desperation will infect those closest to them with desperation. It's the nature of empathy. It's the nature of impact. You know, if you have AIDS and have sex with people you have sex with, there's a probability field that you're going to give that AIDS to another person, right? That's how viruses work. And it's how the virus of love works too. If you have love, you will give that love to other people. And it's not black and white. You can give them love in one day and give them PTSD in the next day, and then give them some love in the next day, and then give them more PTSD the next day, right? So love and PTSD are not the same. The most loving thing that you could possibly do to yourself or anyone else who has PTSD is to heal the PTSD. But I don't know how, right? And you don't know how, or do it, right? Heal my PTSD, heal the PTSD in the world, right? You don't know how. And you can say, well, I could if you did this and this and this and this and this. Well, then you don't know how to facilitate that, do you? Or you would have done it. Or if you can, but you don't want to, that's a form of inability, right? Because if you don't want to do something that's the right thing to do, it's good for everyone, right? The world would be a much better place for all concerned if PTSD was lifted as a virus from the planet. But in order to do that, we'd have to stop wars. We'd have to stop sexually molesting our children. We'd have to get rid of the more than 5% of pedophilic priests that molest children and then tell them they'll go to hell for being molested. We'd have to teach parents how to parent. And a loving cult, a loving culture would do that. It's just we don't know how, right? So the very fact that this chronic disease exists means we don't know how to love ourselves enough to heal it, to prevent it, to get rid of it. So that's a pretty strong link. And because the most loving thing of all is not to cause it, the next most loving thing is to heal it. And the next most loving thing is to acknowledge that it's incredibly painful and we're not doing enough about it and to get moving on that. And we're not doing any of that. We're causing it, we're not healing it, and we're brushing it under the rug culturally and shaming the people who demonstrate symptoms. That's the cult status quo. So it's a cruel and unloving cult in those areas to the people it harms the most, which are the people infected with the disease. Now you can, of course, blame the infant for being born to a father or a mother who has the virus. And you can blame the young adult, the child, the young adult, the grown-up, for demonstrating the symptoms of the disease: helplessness, depression, rage, inability to focus, attention deficit disorder, irritability, anxiety, distrust of other human beings. Why would you trust other human beings if they gave you an incurable disease and then shamed you for having it? You don't and you shouldn't. Those are not trustworthy human beings. They're reptiles, either in ignorance or in incompetence, right? So if you're ignorant, you're too ignorant to know that you're ignorant, and you are profoundly cruel to other people, but you don't understand how or why. It's not your intention. Or you understand that it's very cruel to shame and blame people with a disease, but you're going to do it anyway because you're a reptile, right? That's not a human response. That's a fight, flight, freeze response of a traumatized reptile in a human body, right? The reptilian brain never goes away. It is simply built upon, right? You can regress a human being into a reptilian state. And a reptile is profoundly cruel to trauma survivors because it's not in the nature of a reptile to have empathy or to be capable of love. So trauma and PTSD regresses people into a reptilian state where they stop being as human, which is why there's a strong corollary. For example, most of the young men on death row who were not even 18 but had committed crimes that were viewed to be significant enough to put a young person, a child, to death. Most of those young men, in a study, you could call it, right, had been repeatedly fucked, sodomized by older men growing up, and they didn't know how to deal with homosexuality and male abuse in a cult that shamed them for being homosexual. And they gave that hatred back to the cult in spades. And then the cult decided to kill them. Not help them, not lift off the shame, not do something about the perversity, for example, in the Catholic Church of moving pedophilic priests from parish to parish to protect the image of the church at the expense of the innocence of children. That's reptilian. So if the representative of God for maybe 1 billion people is reptilian, is satanic, right? The serpent, the reptile. Fight, flight, freeze, not empathy and trustworthiness. It's a virus. Reptilian behavior is a virus. PTSD is a virus. Hatred is a virus. They move out, infecting us through mirror neurons, through impact. As all viruses, they find a way in and replicate and move along. So it is loving for the species to acknowledge what we're dealing with and respond, and to a large extent we are not doing that. To a little extent we are. So you could say that the species loves itself 15% in the terrain of PTSD, and is unable to love itself the other 85%, to prevent the PTSD, to acknowledge the PTSD, to heal the PTSD. It's not doing it. So that's one connection. The next connection is that all children find it overwhelmingly difficult to grasp that there's nothing wrong with them and there's nothing they can do about the abuse. And there's something very disturbing, very cult-like, very cruel and reptilian in the entire mass of giants that form the cult of grown-ups that are mistakenly given the label of adults, but are just children passing on intergenerational abuse. It is a mistake to look at such people as trustworthy, as loving, as competent. But the alternative is too horrific for a 6-year-old. My life depends on sadistic people. My life depends on incompetent people. My life depends on people who will hurt me and then shame me for the symptoms of the disease that is rammed down my throat. My cult will refuse to learn about PTSD. I mean, just talk to 100 people in your life. Give the book, The Body Keeps the Score, to 100 people in your life and check in a year later and see how many people decided to watch Netflix, decided to watch porn, decided to watch YouTube, but couldn't get around to becoming even moderately informed at the extent of the problem and the misery in so many innocent lives. And you ask yourself, is this an intelligent, empathic human being? Or is this an addict who doesn't want to know what they don't know because they don't want to respond? And they don't want to be aware that they're not responding to massive amounts of chronic viral pain being passed down generation after generation. Severe incompetence, profound cruelty. And they don't want to own the cruelty. They don't want to own the incompetence. They don't want to own the hate. Oh, I just wanted to watch this woman being fucked from behind by a stranger. It was just so much more interesting. It's not reptilian. I mean, it didn't mean any harm to her, but I just found that more interesting. So that's what I'm going to do for the next 100 hours. You know, when I can't get to sleep, I'm not going to learn how to help an innocent child and maybe create a safer neighborhood. No. I'm not going to give to a traumatic foundation. No. I'm going to buy a wrap for my car, right? And upgrade the tires, right? Because we all know what's important in life. And Clearly it's wraps and tires, right? But we're a civilized cult, right? We all do it. They got new tires, they painted the house, they did that. We've got to do the important things. So a child takes all of this profound stupidity, this profound cruelty, and blames it on themselves by saying, I am an unlovable child. There's nothing wrong with Dad. He has to beat me. There's a funny Monty Python sketch about Dinsdale and Doug, right? He had to nail my head to the floor. He had to. Why? Well, I didn't agree to pay his 27,000% interest rate in his shark loan, right? He's got to do it, right? He's got to abuse me. I deserve it, right? Every child does that. Every child that's ever been traumatized and abused blames themselves. Because by blaming themselves, they give themselves the illusion of power they don't have. And the illusion is this, that if I could just become perfect, which they can't, I could become lovable, which they already are, and then I would be loved, which they won't be. Because the cult does not know how to love them, right? So the unlovability, the inability to love in the cult migrates to the belief and the experience of unlovability in the child. Now, here's the other link, because that's just one of many beliefs, one of many experiences, and you could let go of that identity, that pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Could let go of that pattern, and you could instead, there's other moments when you were loved, right? But here's the thing. An identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. It's a pattern. It just means that it happens again and again and again. That's how you know who you are, right? If every moment my voice changed, my mouth changed, my clothing changed, the background changed, and the topic of conversation changed, you wouldn't say that's Dane talking about trauma. That's an identity. You'd say, I have no idea what's going on. I've lost the pattern. I don't know what's going on. It's too chaotic. I'm just in a chaotic overwhelm here. In fact, let me turn this screen off. I can't make sense of the pattern, right? So pattern is a repeating, right? The repeating pattern here, it's a pattern, right? It's a repeating pattern, round and round. So what happens with trauma is you have a pattern, we all do, an identity. And then there's this very large mass of energy, very dense, very large, very fast, and it collides. That's what violence is. It collides with our pattern of energy. And our pattern of energy shatters. Goes all over the place. And the ego, which is the one that identifies with the pattern, that defines itself with the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. The ego is in shock, is in trauma, is in overwhelm, and is looking for something to hang on to, right? It's looking for something solid. And the most solid thing that the ego can hang on to is the pain of the trauma, because it's solid, it's intense, it's there, and it's repetitive. So the ego then identifies with the moment of trauma, and it's called a traumatic identity, meaning there is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. It's absolutely horrific, but it's very intense, it's very reliable. And so with flashbacks in the brain, etc., the ego grasps panic-stricken to this identity, relives the pain and again and again and again in a loop, and feels safe and secure in that loop. It's a horrifically painful loop, but it's a reliable loop. I can relive the trauma. And so, that's how the traumatic event becomes the traumatic identity. I am the one who was hit. I am the one who was this, because that's what I remember. Again, that becomes the new pattern. So I am now an unlovable, traumatized person. I'm an unlovable, traumatized person. I'm an unlovable, traumatized person. It's going round and round. Now, the thing is, once we attach to the traumatic identity, we have a rational brain, and it likes things to be consistent, right? So I am an unlovable person who is completely and totally loved? No, that doesn't make any sense, right? So once we decide that we are unlovable, we then proceed to create a reality that does not seem to love us, right? So there's now congruity, right? So the congruity, we feel safe because it's consistent. We feel sane because it's consistent. We feel crazy, by the way. When we feel completely unworthy and somebody loves us, we feel crazy. What do you mean you love us? I am unworthy. What part of that, of what? What are you unworthy? Of being loved. What part of that don't you get? I love you. This is nuts. I don't get it. I am unworthy of love. How can you love me? I do. Get out of here. Go away. You're messing with the pattern. You're messing with the consistency, right? So there is a very strong part in the psyche, in the body, that is looking for consistency. And there's a very strong part of the ego that is looking for certainty of identity. And when the most certain identity is the traumatic identity, and when the traumatic identity happens at a young age, and thus the unlovability of the cult becomes my unlovability, then I am unlovable. That's the most solid thing that I know, and it's my fault. And I am not worthy of love because I'm unlovable, and it's all my fault. So now I've got control, but I've got this horrific burden, and now I'm going to feel threatened by anyone who loves me. Anyone who loves me, who threatens to love me, is messing with something. Like I've got to hang on to that solid thing, because otherwise I'm lost. I'm floating in trauma. I don't know who I am. Don't know what I'm becoming. I've got to hang on to that. But I split. I become insane if somebody loves me and I am unlovable. Those don't go together. One of them has to give or I go crazy. And I'm not going to give up my traumatic identity. I'm going to sabotage. And this is how defensive identities work, right? Because, okay, you love me. Well, what if I sleep with your sister? Ah, now you don't love me. I love it. Wonderful. It makes sense. I'm unlovable. You don't love me. Oh, thank goodness, right? I'm unlovable and you don't love me. Oh, it's just such a relief. I was so confused there for a minute. You were saying you loved me and, of course you don't love me. I'm unlovable. Don't you get it? Come on, let's move, to the next subject. So once the ego identifies with the trauma and internalizes the unlovability, because for a child to be traumatized, they were not loved. It doesn't mean they're unlovable, but that is the internalization of a world that is unwilling, incapable of loving, right? And so now we've got now we've got a part in the psyche that is working for consistency, which is proving day in and day out, I'm unlovable, I'm unlovable, I'm unlovable, because nobody loves me. This person could love me, let me run in the other direction. This person could love me, let me sabotage the love. This person could love me, let me pretend they don't exist. Let's focus on the criticism, right? They said that I was defensive. They think I'm a shit. Of course, because I'm unlovable. But they also said that you're a really intelligent, wonderful person. Nah, they didn't mean that. They didn't mean it, right? I am unlovable. We all know that. They didn't mean that. But they really meant that I was defensive. Well, how do you know? Well, it's consistent with my preconception, my identity, right? So there's a correlation there. Now, what's some of the other threads between unlovability and trauma? Well, one of the things that is common to everyone with PTSD is that they will do just about anything to avoid feeling traumatically helpless in PTSD, right? They will do just about anything to avoid the feelings of helplessness, of despair, of loneliness, of overwhelm, of grief in a cult that didn't respond. So they're determined to do anything to not do that. And in the process of being so committed, that could lead to that, that could lead to that. A lot of the focus is on control, right? So I don't want to feel this. Okay, what's your plan? Well, first I've got to get totally in control. And then anytime those feelings are coming, I've got to see them. Oh, that could lead to that. No, stop that. Stop that over there. Over there, stop. Okay. Thank goodness, right? That could have led to this, which could have led to this, which could have led to this. And then I could have had those horrible feelings again, right? So stop that, right? So we stop that, right? But you see, the person being controlled and this paranoid, don't do that, don't do that, you're getting too close, don't do that. You did that, right? Don't look at your phone while I'm talking to you. Look here, right? Do this, do that, don't do this. These people, of course, don't feel loved. They feel controlled. They feel micromanaged, which is what they are. They're not being loved. They are being controlled and micromanaged. And the natural physiological and psychological response to being controlled and micromanaged is resentment, is sadness. Why can't we be free in this relationship? Why does it? No, you can't be free because this could lead to this and that could lead to that. And then that could lead to me feeling these horrible feelings. And then I'll feel completely unlovable. Oh, we can't have that. So you don't do that, you don't do that, you don't do that, don't do that. Right? So, finally, I've regained control. But everyone's left. Or if they've stayed, they're seething, right? Of course they're seething because I'm unlovable, right? So the control, which is a prerequisite to the commitment never to feel that way again, which every trauma survivor knows, right? Every trauma survivor knows that feeling those feelings in timeless helplessness is the worst possible thing. It's worse than death, right? Don't put me into those feelings. I've got to control this so that I can control that, so that I can control this, so that I never feel that way again. So this is irritating, depressing. Oh, he's got to control me again because of this. I looked at another guy, obviously because I'm going to have sex with them, and obviously that's going to bring up their... I do apologize. I did indeed. You caught me red-handed looking at that guy. Tell me all about it. Why am I... Like, do I feel loved to you and excited, Excited to go out on a walk again where I might glance at some guy? No, I don't. Please, will it ever end? Will I ever be free to look at people again in this relationship? Probably not. God, you son of a bitch, right? Yep, you see, I'm unlovable. I'm unlovable. See, you know that I'm a son of a bitch, so of course I'm insecure, and that's why you can't look at other guys, because it's too devastating to be unlovable. So the very control that someone with trauma and PTSD uses to not be re-traumatized is difficult for people to love. It's not unlovable if you know what trauma is and you understand its function. You can have tremendous empathy for that. It's very hard when you're really close to someone and you know nothing about trauma because your cult is traumatically illiterate. It's very hard to look at that and have deep compassion. My goodness, you are locked as an ego in your worst nightmare. You relive it 10 times a day. You've never been able to get out. Your cult gave you this disease and nobody's ever seen it and healed you. This is unbelievably sad and horrific. Let me get to work and let's heal this PTSD. And then, when you're free and your identity has found it yourself, not the disease, and you remember who you are, it's so easy to love who you are. I've always loved who you are. I don't love your traumatic, controlling identity that you are more addicted to than our relationship. I don't love that. I've never loved that. It's constantly undermining my well-being. Go fuck yourself, right? Oh, I'm unlovable. She said, go fuck myself. I'm unlovable, right? It's because the traumatic PTSD identity is not in touch with itself. It doesn't recognize that there's something else out there that is lovable. This is all it is. I am this pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that I'm unlovable, that I'm controlling, that I need. I am that. That's all I am. So the more we cling to this with the ego addiction of the traumatic identity, the harder it is for people to love us. The harder it is for people to love us, the less they love us. And the less they love us, the more we cling to the familiar, the family, the disease, because that's all I've got. Everyone's going to leave. The only thing left is the disease, right? The only thing there stopping me from endless, horrific loneliness is the remembrance of the disease. And I've got to hang on. I've got to hang on to control, right? And so that's a very, very big correlation. Now, another connection between unlovability and PTSD and trauma is that we look at ourselves, like I look at myself, and I think, gosh, I'm awfully uptight about this situation because I've got to be in control. I'm awfully uptight about this situation. I wouldn't enjoy being around me in all this control. Of course they don't like that. I wouldn't like that. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, how could anyone love that? And what that is the disease. That's PTSD, right? How could anyone love PTSD, right? How could they love that PTSD response? How could they love this? How could they love this? I wouldn't like it. I'm embarrassed, right? And this brings up the panic. I'm going to be all alone, abandoned, unloved in PTSD forever and ever and ever, right? No one's going to help me out of this. They're just going to judge me. They judged me over there, right? I was too needy, so they punished me. They withdrew. And I was too controlling, so they punished me and they withdrew. And I'm just stuck here. No one's going to help me out. And this revs up the identity. I've got to do. But then nobody loves that either. And I've got to do this and this, and nobody loves that either. It's like, I don't love this part of me either, right? I don't like this. I wish I could be like this. Calm and soothing and take it easy and just see you later, whenever, high five. Let's just see what happens. Life's an adventure. I mean, people could love that person, but they couldn't love me, the scared, terrified one. The scared, terrified one can hide for a little bit, but then it needs to come out to breathe, and then nobody loves that part. So he becomes more scared and more terrified because nobody's loving him, right? And I look at him and I don't love him. I say, of course they don't love you. What do? I don't know. Go away. Well, I can't. This is who I am. panic, the suspense, waiting for rejection. Waiting for rejection. And then this is exhausting. It's hard to sleep. It's hard to stay. And then now there's low energy. And people find it harder to love low energy than high energy, right? High energy, how's it going? Good to see you. People can love that one. But I spent all night anxiously going through this. People are like, well, go away. I don't want to talk to you. You're anxious. I want to talk with someone who's high energy. See, nobody's going to love me, so I'm more anxious, right? You see? And it takes a cult that is incapable of loving to perpetuate that, right? And then you have gurus out there, the teachers, right? The 5 people you spend the most time with will define you. Pick people who are happier than you, who are richer than you. Well, I'm not one of those people. I'm sad and depressed. Other people should be picking other people so they can climb the social ladder. They shouldn't be picking me, because if they pick 5 people like me, they will become terrified and small. I'm ruining people's lives. Maybe I should commit suicide as a public service. Yes, do that, says all the people. We don't know what to do with you. If you would just kill yourself, then we could all say, oh, it's so sad. But we wouldn't have to deal with you, right? Because we don't know what we're doing, and we don't want to acknowledge that. We don't like running into you because you're all anxious. It would be a public service to commit suicide, right? Finally, we don't. What's all that about, right? And now we can just get on. Like the world would be a better place if we could just give children PTSD in childhood. And then we don't want to seem cruel with our ignorance and incompetence. So maybe they'll just kill themselves, and we can say, if only we had known, right? What do you mean, if only you had known? You 97% of you out of 100 would willingly watch porn for 100 hours before you'd spend 30 hours learning trauma and its symptoms. If only you had known. You didn't want to know. You don't want to know. Oh, I'm not talking about this. You're being negative. You're being judgmental. Yes, I am. But it's very negative. It's very accurate judgments, right? So one of the obvious movements out of unlovability is to call out a cult that is refusing to be loving. You're not loving me here, you're not loving me here, you're not loving me here, you're not loving me there. But a sociopathic and incompetent cult does not say, oh, thanks for telling me, what should I do here? And then you can say, well, when I'm feeling terrified, could you hold me for 30 minutes? Okay, I'll hold you for 30 minutes. Oh, thank you. No one's ever done that, right? Nobody wants to hold me for 30 minutes every time I'm anxious. But it works. So now my anxiety is down. Now I feel more cheerful. Now I feel more relaxed, right? Now I have some jokes. You've never heard my jokes because I've been stressed because nobody's ever held me for 30 minutes, right? Calm me down out of the adrenaline rush, right? And so now you see this about me, all these things that couldn't blossom in me because of all of the withheld love, with all of the incompetence around me, now starts to emerge. So, but in an incompetent and sociopathic scarcity mentality cult, when you ask someone, please help me, they immediately avoid you. He needs help, he's too needy, I'm out of here. That's just like the bank, like you've learned from a reptile. You go into the bank, I've lost my job, my husband is in an accident, I desperately need $100,000 of money because I got to stay home and take care of my husband. And they said, oh, you have no job. Your husband obviously doesn't have any job, and you're desperate. Good day, ma'am. We do not do business with people who need money. We do business with people who don't need money. In fact, why don't you come back to us when you have $1 billion in our bank, and we would be delighted to loan you the $1 billion you already have. How about that? Right? Or if you aren't dead and your husband is still alive and you don't go into a grief and rage spiral because everyone let you die rather than give you the help you needed, if that doesn't happen and you decide to start a business and then you figure out how to grow the business 50% a year, we'll give you a loan for that too, right? But we don't actually help people because we're reptiles. And reptiles are not trying to help people. They're trying to make money off of whatever possible. And if there's a great chance, like if you want to put your house on the market for half price, we'll buy that very happily. So you end up on the street, you want to sell all your assets at half price, we'd be delighted to facilitate that, but not to actually help you heal your husband and keep your marriage together. I mean, that's none of our concern. We're a business, right? We're reptiles. We only do things that make money for rich people. And, that's not what you're trying to do here, right? You're trying to help your husband, but we're trying to make money for rich people, starting with ourselves, right? And so not much we can do. We couldn't possibly change our policy because then all the reptiles who have put their money with us to make more money would take their money to other reptiles, right? So in essence, you're surrounded by reptiles, and that's just the way it is, right? And we're proud of it. Greed is good. So what do you do there, right? So if you start expressing anger, which is a reasonable thing, you goddamn motherfucker, you call yourself a fucking human being? You've offered me money when I don't want it for 10 fucking years and I actually want to help my husband right now and you can't come up with a fucking penny? Grow up, you motherfucker. Come back when you're a human being. And they escort you out with security and are proud of their reptilian nature, right? But you can't go into that bank again. Now there's a restraining order, right? Because you were a human being, right? In other words, one path to all of this sociopathic behavior is to confront the reptile. Don't talk about love. Give me a hug, you goddamn motherfucker. Oh, you're awfully negative. We're not going to even talk to you anymore, right? So in an incompetent and reptilian cult, most people run away from confrontation. Now you have nobody, right? And so what's the belief? I'm unlovable. So I'm unlovable could externalize into you are unloving. It's the same thing, right? Nobody's loving me, and everything and everyone is lovable if you are competent enough to love. If you are competent enough to love, everything is lovable. You can't love everything because you don't have unlimited competence. You have a limit to what you can love. But that is not love's limit, that's your limit. Other people have a limit to where and how they can love me, right? I just emailed a therapist, for example, and I said that because 2 other therapists came close to killing me with psychedelics supposedly to heal trauma, I'm picky about the therapists and I want to have a conversation to go over, whether or not they're credible, whether they or not they meet my standard for a safe therapist in this terrain. That therapist doesn't want to talk to me, right? In other words, I'm through having been abused by multiple therapists. I'm through the idea of saying, poor me, I am unworthy of a little bit of your time, but perhaps if I give you hundreds of dollars an hour, you could give a little bit of what you've learned in textbooks, and if it works out, I'm lucky, and if I don't, you keep the money and send me off, right? Or I just stay getting incompetent service, right? Or I get abused, right? Sexually or otherwise, right? That's one of the things that happens in dissociative psychedelic states is some people will sexually abuse you. It happened to me. My male therapist, in a dissociative dose of psilocybin and MDMA, decided to explore a romantic relationship with his patient, right? That doesn't bestow a lot of trust in therapists, right? But there's plenty of therapists that don't want to deal with that, right? They want to deal with someone that looks at therapists as if they're just wonderful people because they have a named therapist, right? In fact, there is profound incompetence in the industry, but therapists are the last to want to deal with that for the most part. I've found in talking with over 100 and asking if they want to learn something or do an interview or anything that would help them increase their competence or assess them. They don't want to do it, right? So you could say that in an irritable and skeptical state of mind, very few therapists are able and willing to love me, right? So what's the option, right? If therapists are going to break the law and abuse patients, and then boycott all patients who are skeptical, it basically means roll of the dice or don't get help, right? What if doctors said that? I don't like your attitude. I'm not going to stitch up your leg. Well, we'd have a lot of dead people around, right? Because you don't have a very good attitude when you're in massive amounts of pain from a car crash, right? You're scared, traumatized, irritable, etc. And naturally, you have whatever state of mind that evokes for you. So these are the ways that unlovability correlates with trauma and PTSD. You are not unlovable. I am not unlovable. I just do not know how to love myself better than I'm already doing. And I don't know how to love you better than I'm already doing. And you don't know how to love me better than you're already doing, or maybe you do, but haven't gotten around to it. But the fact that this person and this person and this person is unable and unwilling to love you does not mean you're unlovable. It just means the people around you are not able and willing to love you better than they do. And that is an ecology. That's an ecological framework where self-love and love of another blend, right? Because imagine if my wife, for example, loved herself enough to study the literature enough, to learn the skills enough to heal my PTSD. That would mean she'd love me more than I love myself, because I, after 1,000 hours of study and, hundreds of thousands of dollars and various things, I haven't figured out how to do that. But let's say that she loved herself enough to do that for me, and she was able to do what I can't. Well, she would get a husband that doesn't have PTSD, right? Which is a more self-loving husband than a husband with PTSD, right? If you really, really, really love yourself, and you can choose between having a husband with PTSD and not with PTSD, you would have a husband without PTSD. Not by banishing, like Hitler sent all of the deformities off to the incinerator. Even before Hitler mass murdered the Jewish race, Hitler was interested in incinerating retarded children, people with disabilities, various elderly, etc. His whole policy was to have a beautiful, lovable Germany by burning all the Germans who had any symptoms of suffering. And this was, of course, something he learned from his parents and from his cult, right? Because their idea was to scorch and shame and attack any part of him that was deformed, try and kill it. And he did his best to kill off the parts of him that nobody liked. Banish it, bury it, kill it, gas it. Get it away from me. So naturally, that's his policy, right? You have a strange eye, you've got a scar here, you've got a 3-year-old maturity level, off to the gas chambers, off to the gas chambers. And now it's all solved, right? So that's Hitler's approach to solving the diseases and the pains and the misery in our approach. And it's not an uncommon one. We love to blame Hitler, but There's plenty today and plenty of support at the time. Plenty of hatred for the Jews in America at the time. Plenty of hatred in Europe for the Jews, right? It's only the Jews, right? That's the sociopathic approach. Take anyone that upsets me and kill them. And then they don't upset me anymore because I've killed them. It's wonderful, right? No more deformities. I can go along. Only white Aryan people left, right? That's exactly what we do at a psychological level today in our cult. That person's depressed, get rid of them. Oh, we're not going to physically kill them. We'll emotionally kill them. We just won't invite them anywhere. We'll make them feel worse than dead. We won't heal them. We won't understand why they're depressed. We won't understand the intergenerational abuse system. That would take a higher level of love than it causes to cause the problem in the first place, right? We live in a cult, in a planet of intergenerational chronic abuse of the cruelest sort. We've been doing it for thousands of years, right? And as Einstein says, we don't have to get any smarter to live in this world. We're already here, right? The level of intelligence that it takes to send a guy off to World War II, ignore his shock, make sure that you don't ask him any questions about trauma or PTSD, despite the fact that it's been part of every war since the beginning of time. Don't look at the traumatic literature. Let's not create any money for therapists to heal that. Let's just send him home to his kid. He can abuse the kid, right? And we can balance the budget, right? So the level of intelligence needed to bring PTSD into my family is already here. We've done it. Hooray. We've got that level of intelligence. But that level of intelligence, the level of intelligence it took to give my grandfather PTSD and then walk away and pretend nothing was happening, right? Very smart, isn't it? We've got that, right? But that level of intelligence isn't smart enough to heal PTSD and look for intergenerational abuse patterns and do something about it. For that, you have to be smarter. So smart that you wouldn't cause PTSD in the first place. That's about as smart as you need to be to heal the PTSD that you've got. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful world? Where 20% of the people aren't depressed, where it isn't so goddamn difficult to love someone because they've internalized the unlovability of their abuse, where we weren't so lonely. Wouldn't that be an amazing accomplishment, right? Well, that would be intelligent. But that would also be to change from where we are, because where we are is not as intelligent, to put it mildly. And so the suffering, the pain, the trauma, the grief, the rape, the incest, the shame, the brutality, the PTSD, the chauvinism, the racism, the bullying, to heal that, and it's all one thing, involves a higher state of love than we have. But in the meantime, regressed, traumatized children will feel unlovability as they attempt to take ownership of a wound that exists outside of them and is being ignored by as many people as possible.